Hi, it's Chris Moore with Senior Remodeling Experts. Welcome to Aging in Place is a Team Sport. It's a video series where we talk to different providers. We explore how families, professionals, and communities can come together to help older adults live safely, comfortably, and independently at home. I'm here to guide you, connect you with the right resources, and help make the rest of your life the best of your life. Welcome back to Aging in Place is a Team Sport. I'm Chris Moore. I am delighted to have with me today Stacy Shewey with Hands for Life. And I think you will be as amazed as I was when you find out what she's involved with around the world. So welcome, Stacy. Tell us a little bit about Hands for Life and your work there and what all you guys do.
Yeah, thank you for having me. So, Hands for Life is a nonprofit focusing on the global aging crisis. And many people in the United States know that we have issues here taking care of our aging population. We can't build assisted living fast enough. We can't hire caregivers. It's very costly. But this is a global issue that we're dealing with. And in developing countries, the people don't have resources like we do in the United States. There's not organizations like AARP, there's not free medical where you can just walk into a hospital and get care. There's not food banks or homeless shelters. So the people really have no one and nothing to care for them. So that's Hands for Life is focusing on the global aging crisis with the solution being intergenerational relationships. So at Hands for Life, we say that everything has to have a solution, because it's fine to feed somebody today that's hungry, but tomorrow they'll be hungry again. So let's find a solution. And so what we're doing is we're pairing orphaned children with orphaned seniors. We're redefining the word orphan. So an orphan simply is somebody that doesn't have family, right? So orphan seniors with the orphan children, bringing them together to form a beautiful, new, unique family. So our first project we are doing in Africa. And what we want to do, Chris, is prove that there is a better way to care for people. How can we educate our sandwich generation, those 18 to 40-year-olds, on how to best care for people, the vulnerable populations on both sides, the young and old? So we want to build an intergenerational educational campus where we will house 14 orphan children, 14 orphan seniors in one home. There'll be a career workshop where the seniors could teach the children what their trade was, whether it's sewing, making, brick making, woodworking. So it gives purpose to the seniors, but it gives a trade to the children. We will have a mentorship program, so the children are well-rounded in job trade, life skills, and the suit armor of God to go out in their country and be successful, productive adults. We will have farming. There'll be an aquaponic farm. There'll be a bee farm, a tree farm, and a permaculture farm, so that sandwich generation can come in. We can teach them how to be a business owner and launch them into a farming career, with the expectation that the first fruits of their labor has to be reinvested in the next entrepreneur in our project. So it's a self-sustaining cycle, and it is a pay-it-forward system is what we're creating. So our whole focus is on education and equipping and educating the people on how to best care for others in their own country and launching them to multiply. So we will only have one campus per developing country. And the topic really that we're trying to create is a sort of utopia community. How can we really look at holistic ways of caring for people? So I'm heading to Okinawa, Japan in a couple of weeks to study the Blue Zone principles and talk to the people there, talk to all generations, what has worked in the past, what is kind of breaking down in their culture right now, and what are the reasons, what is going on that people aren't living as long as they used to in Japan, and what has changed. And I think I have, an idea, and I think they're bringing in some Western ways in it. So they're emulating our culture, and it's having some negative effects. So what can we do? Can we take what we know works well in the way that those in the blue zone live and implement that in a culture? And can we take what we know we're doing right here with our technology, with our advanced healthcare, and apply that into one model, one community model? And so we want to do that in developing countries because there's no regulation. So we can try things out, prove our hypothesis, and then bring it back to the States and say, hey, look, this works. Let's try change our culture into thinking more like implementing some stuff that we did in the 50s where family was really important, where generations took care of each other during all seasons of life.
Wow, that's really great. One of the things that I'm, in my studies is in studying multi-generational living and how um, in historical America that multi-generational living model was rooted in the land. It was rooted in agriculture, so that in a farming community, when you have a farm, and then in a farm, the more children you have, the more farm hands you have. And so, large families were the norm. And then typically at least one or more of those children would decide to stay on the farm and carry on the family farm. And then the older generation, as they aged, would remain in the household and would be a source of knowledge and a source of wisdom and understanding, and being able to, explain farming methods and life wisdom and all that to the younger generation. And then eventually the next generation would inherit the farm, and life would continue in that way. But as we became a more industrialized society and we moved away from agricultural roots, then people became more dispersed, and oftentimes the older generation did not have any family living nearby, and then all of the senior living came about. So that's kind of in a nutshell how we got to where we are. But in the last few decades, we're seeing a resurgence of multi-generational living, mostly for economic and caregiving reasons. And what I'm hoping is that we will recognize as a society the benefit culturally and interpersonally that, has kind of fallen by the wayside. And a lot of times older retired people just feel like they're not really useful or contributing any longer.
Exactly. And I grew up I was adopted from birth, but adopted into Italian family. And so that was just kind of the norm in the culture of Italians and a lot of cultures, Asians and, Latin Americans, where families stay together and take care of each other. And so my grandparents lived downstairs. We had related living. So they had their own little house downstairs, 2 bedrooms, kitchen. And it was wonderful experience growing up, having my grandparents who lived through the Depression. So they really shaped who I am today. And to this day, I have to wash out my Ziploc baggies. I can't leave running water, turn off all the lights. But I love to hear their stories of, the Depression and gain their wisdom and just suck it in. I loved hanging out with them and their friends. And so I wanted that for my children because it's such a special bond between a grandparent and a grandchild. So my parents lived right next door to us when my kids were growing up, and very tight-knit family. But you're right, where there's so many benefits to this intergenerational living model where it gives purpose to the grandparents, but the children get to gain that wisdom and they get to gain skills. And also, like growing up, if my mom, both of my parents had to work, so my grandma would make us breakfast. And if my mom was going through cancer at one point and was sick, and my grandparents were right there to pitch in and pick us up from school and drive us around and do the cooking. So there's a lot of benefits to it. And, I became a caregiver for both of my parents just in the last year and a half. They both fell ill suddenly, and I caregived for them. And, I was an executive director for an assisted living memory care. And there's some phenomenal caregivers, but it is hard to find those who really care for the residents. And so, nobody's going to love and care for your family member like you are going to. So, a lot of benefits to this.
Definitely. Yeah. And you brought up the blue zones, and I've done a little reading about that. And I find it interesting that, for those that don't know, the blue zones are 5 areas around the world where people live extraordinarily long lives. And there was a study done where someone tried to figure out, what are the commonalities between these cultures? And one of the primary commonalities was the sense of community and the sense of belonging and how much social interaction people had with one another, how closely knit their communities were. And they were also physically active agricultural communities for the most part. And people did a lot of walking, and their diets were particularly healthy and some other things. But the fact that their elders were held in high esteem and they were revered and looked at as the sources of wisdom, the source of knowledge, the person that the society would go to for answers. And I think that has a big bearing on how long people live, because in our society, we tend to view seniors as a burden on society rather than as an important and valuable contributor. And I think that has a lowering effect on our lifespan. I read a stat recently that is very sobering. It's that the United States, with all of its technology and all of its advancement and all of its wealth, is number 48 in the world in longevity. And they're number 72 in the world in health span, which is the number of years we live when we're healthy and able to move around and function. And yet we spend more money than any other country in the world on healthcare. So clearly throwing money at the problem is not the answer.
Don't you think like the answer, I think it's very simple. Let's get to God's original intention of how we are supposed to live. We're supposed to live in community. We're supposed to eat, not processed foods. We're supposed to eat whole foods that aren't sprayed with chemicals. We're supposed to keep natural movement. We're not made to sit in front of the computer all day and then go run on a treadmill for an hour. In these blue zones, they're just keep moving. So they're walking stairs. They're taking the stairs instead of escalators. They're, mixing their bowl with their spoon and not electric beaters. Just how much natural movement can you incorporate in your day? Can you walk instead of driving down the street? I know for us, my husband will be like, we're going to a restaurant, half a mile away and we're driving there. Why are we not walking? So can we incorporate a more basic way of living, go back to basics? And just with, that's what I said. I want to prove like healthcare. We don't need to be taking all of these pills. We don't need to be trying so hard to cling to life. Can we teach this younger generation how the natural cycle of aging looks like? And not trying so hard to beat it, because, nobody wants longevity without good health, right? But we all want longevity. So it's a balance. You have to have that health span and lifespan. So how do we create that good health and long life where right now we're living long lives and not in good health. So let's shift that way of thinking. Let's start to focus on balance.
Yeah. And I think purpose is a huge part of that. People have to have a reason to get up in the morning. I think it's in our nature to create things, to connect with other people, and to contribute to society. And if we're not in some way doing those three things, we feel like something's missing. And I think that the way that our society views retirement, people work for 40 years, oftentimes doing a job that they don't like, with the idea that one of these days I'm going to retire and then I'm going to put my feet up and just do nothing.
Yeah.
And after a few days of your putting your feet up and doing nothing, you start to feel like, well, this is boring.
Yeah.
Right?
Why am I
What's
doing
my
this today?
what is my purpose? What am I contributing? And I worked all this time to do this. And so I think having purpose, having a whatever that purpose is, whatever your hopes and dreams are. One of the things I'm trying to do with Age Out Loud is encourage people, what is that thing you've all your life wanted to do, but maybe you didn't think you could?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's
Yeah.
time to dream outrageously. Maybe it's time to step out in faith and do the thing that you never really thought you could do, but you always desired to. The River Jordan didn't dry up until the children of Israel stuck their toe in the water. So much for so many people of all ages, but particularly older people. You've got to step out in faith. You've got to take the plunge and say, I'm going to do this. And it sounds like that's what you've done with your Hands for Life. What's the genesis story? How did Hands for Life
Yeah,
come about?
it's right on topic here because I was in the hospitality industry for my career, and that is my gift is hospitality. I love serving others. That's what God has given me as a gift. But so we lived in Illinois, sold our business, my hospitality business, and was moving down to Florida because my daughter decided to go to University of Tampa. And we said, well, we want to get out of the cold. We want to get out of Chicago. And she's like, no, you can't follow me. I'm trying to get rid of you people. So we said, we'll go to Jacksonville. You're over in Tampa. But then I'm like, what am I going to do for a job? Because I don't want to start a business. And so I'm like, I want a job where I'm making a difference every day in somebody's life. I'm, 50 years old now, and I need that important job. And so my mom encouraged me. She's like, well, why don't you go run an assisted living? It's like running a hotel, and you love, old people. I'm like, yes, I would love to do that. So I did get a job doing that. It was the management company changed hands halfway through my tenure there. Unfortunately, this new company was all about the bottom line. And I said, look, I understand business. I'm a businesswoman. I know how to make you profit, but you don't do it at the expense of people's lives. And, that's what they were there for. Cut staff, cut staff, cut staff. And I said when I gave my resignation, I put in there, something bad is going to happen here, and it's not going to be on my watch. And so I left, and 4 months later, I got a call from an attorney asking me to help her in 2 wrongful death lawsuits in that place. So just heartbreaking for me. But I went to lunch with an industry professional, and he said, if you could do any job, what would it be? And I said, well, I would go do assisted living in developing countries, but I got 3 kids in college. I can't go do that now. And he's like, go start that on your own. So I said, oh, never thought about that. So I took 2 months to write up a business plan and go in prayer. And God said, at first I thought it was assisted living. And he said, no, I don't need more buildings. I need you to solve problems. And so it was that right time of my life where, it's not always when you get into retirement age where you're like, okay, I'm going to do what I always dreamt of. I never dreamt of doing this, but it's listening to what God's assignment is for that season of your life. And there's a difference between a calling and an assignment. My calling is to serve others. That's my gift, hospitality. But my assignment is different during different seasons of my life. I was a mom for a season. So I served my children and, poured into them. And now it's serving the least of God's people. And so, sometimes I was sitting in church and I said, here I am, God, use me. And I didn't know what that looked like. And then he put Hands for Life into my lap. And he has grown it into this beautiful organization, which I can never have come up with. And our business model, just by focusing on caring for the aging population, it has 14 out of the 17 UN Sustainable Development Goals. We hit 14 of them. And it's just incredible how God can weave in, his plan for us. So we're focusing on caring for the aging through intergenerational relationships. And it's a beautiful model. And it's like, it totally makes sense that we all need, nowadays kids go all over the world when you get, and parents can't make the trek, and it's not our culture. Now we are scattered all over. So if you don't have family, you need to look at that Moai group, is what they call it in Japan. That group of people that you do life together. In our terms, we say it's a small disciple group in our church. So it's a group of people who celebrate the good times with you, celebrate milestones, but are there to grieve with you when you have loss, or comfort you when you're going through trials and tribulation. There's some basics, that we need to focus back on in our culture and teach that to the younger generation. And that's what we're trying to do at Hands for Life. We're trying to teach the circle of life. Your elders helped you into this world and form you and care for you. We need to help our elders out of this world and care for them in their last season. A world where generations care for each other during all seasons of life is what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, I love that. So you have the project going in Africa, which is your initial, or right?
Yeah, it's our prototype campus that we're trying to build. We have community outreach going right now. We have 17 grandparents in our Hands for Life family and 4 grandkids. And we have a sponsorship program, $39 a month. You can sponsor a grandparent. You can help them we buy supplements. We give them surgeries, assisted, walkers, wheelchairs, or help put a new roof on their hut. The children, we send them to school and give them clothes and healthcare, that type of thing. But our community outreach, we also have where we share the gospel. So we say our first mission is the Great Commission, even though, our primary focus is on the aging population, but it's holistic, body, mind, soul, spirit. So we also, in our community outreach, we have healthcare, where we need to teach people how to best care for our aging. So in Africa, in all over the world, in developing countries, they're not familiar with certain aging diseases and like dementia and Alzheimer's. So we had a grandmother in our program, Grandma Catherine, who had dementia, and she was exhibiting signs where she was very confused and got aggressive, and her community thought she was possessed by a demon. And so their solution was to do an exorcism and bring in a witch doctor. And because she didn't get the medical treatment that she needed, she lost her life. So it was just confirmation that what we are doing in our healthcare education is so important to teach people on the basics of healthy eating, the basics of how to do a proper transfer. How do you move grandma from the chair to the bed without dropping her or dislocating a shoulder? So we are starting at basics, and we're training family members how to care for their loved ones, and we're training healthcare workers. What we know here, I'm collaborating with senior living experts from all over the world. And so mental health experts, because people have so much trauma. So how do we deal with trauma and just the beauty of the dying process? So people that we're working with, and this transcends all borders, is when you've been through some trauma, we're pairing generations together. So the grandkids are going to lose grandparents. So how do you go through that process of dying in a beautiful, healthy way and celebrate life and not be traumatized again by death? God prepared me. 3 years ago, we lost a 4-year-old son who fell 10 stories into a stone quarry. And this was 3 days after I had breast cancer surgery. So my life was just turned upside down. Then my dad fell ill. I had caregived for him for 6 weeks before he lost his life unexpectedly. My aunt, I caregived for her. She lost her life. My mom got ejected from a golf cart, broke her femur, 2 surgeries on that, an infection, took root in her spine, 3 more surgeries. She finally lost her life from the infection. And then my mother-in-law passed as well. So we lost 5 loved ones within 22 months' time. And so the lessons I learned from that, Chris, were a couple: that you don't go through that kind of trauma and trials. I didn't have time to grieve for one loss. I was thrown into the next, trial. It's only through knowing God, and you have a decision. You either run to Jesus or you get angry. And so our family chose, and it's a choice. Every day you get up and you choose to lean in to the word of God and to his promises. And we experienced that unexplainable joy and peace only God can give you. And the other lesson that I learned was, if you focus on yourself and your woes, like, oh, look at me, how sad. I'm so miserable because of all that I'm going through. That is going to put you into a spiral, downward spiral of, depression. And then you're going to need drugs, and many people turn to alcohol. And so I focused on, there's always somebody in the world that has it worse off than you, always. So let's focus on serving others. Take your attention off of your woes and go help somebody else, because that's where joy comes from, is, that giving to others, you get so much more in return.
Yes.
So that's what I did. And that's my testimony, that those are the ways that I got through the last 3 years.
Well, I'd like to key in on what you said about it being a choice, how we process our pain and our suffering. And in the final analysis, that's the only choice we have. We don't control what happens to us. We don't control when our loved ones are taken away. We would go back and erase that if we could, in a heartbeat. We would give everything we owned to get those precious lives back. But we don't have that choice. But we do have the choice of how we're going to react, how we're going to process the pain and the suffering. And I've come to believe that suffering is actually a gift, because it's only in the suffering that we find out what kind of faith we have. It's only in the suffering, when we're up against something that we have no way to process and no way to control and no way to deal with, that we discover the bountiful and wonderful grace of God. And it's only people who have been through that understand. July 31st of 2002, my wife, Barbara, of 33 years, died of lung cancer. And when she died, there was such a peace in that ICU room, and she had a big smile on her face. But she was 55 years old. And in the days and weeks and months that followed that, why? 55 years old? That's way too young. What's my purpose now? What do I do now? What am I, And then it came to me one day that when we first got married, when she was 22, she got sick with encephalitis. And she lost her vision. She had seizures. They put her in a hospital room with a quarantine sign on the door, and the doctors in white coats would stand around and whisper, and they didn't tell me for 3 days what was going on with her. We had just gotten married in October, and this was in January. And she told me later that she didn't She didn't know who I was. She said, I knew I liked you, but I couldn't figure out who you were. Encephalitis, 90% of people who have encephalitis die.
Yeah.
And 90% of people who don't die lose all their short-term memory. All she knew who Jesus was. She knew who her three boys were. And that was it. And she was laying in that hospital room praying. And at this point, she didn't have speech. Her mind there was no speech. It was all in the spirit. But she's praying, Jesus, if you will let me live, I will teach my boys about you.
Love that.
And at that moment, she felt the Holy Spirit come down over her bed like a quilt. And the next day, she started getting better. It was not an instantaneous healing. It was months of hard work. But it occurred to me in that moment that if someone had told me at that time, she's not going to die, she's going to live 33 more years and bear you three more children, I would have been ecstatic. And so that was where my choice came. I had the choice to be ecstatic that she didn't die at 22 and we had 33 years together, or to be angry and bitter and upset and dejected because she died.
Only had 55 years.
Only. Right.
Yeah.
And so it's that perspective and that revelation in that moment is what helped me get through that, because I recognized that my perspective would change my experience. And I think that's very true in aging too, because if you have the perspective that I'm old and I've outlived my usefulness and I'm not any good to anybody and I might as well just die, then you're going to it's going to be terrible.
Yeah.
The perspective is God has blessed me to live a long life, and I'm here, and I have all these decades of experience, and I'm going to find a way to contribute, and I'm going to find a way to make someone else's experience of life a little bit better.
I learned that, we have a good father, and when he has been so good in giving me eyes to see and ears to hear the whys, because we all ask why did you take my 24-year-old son? But I can look now and I see and I know and I recognize the whys, because if you have that relationship with him, he's going to answer your questions, right? He will give you his ways are so much bigger and far greater than we could ever comprehend, but he will give you glimpses and answers to give you peace. And I remember it was 3 days after Alex died. Every time I closed my eyes, all I saw was step fall, step fall, step fall, step fall. And I cried out to the Lord and I said, Lord, please take this vision from me because it's tormenting. And he said so clearly to me, I've only heard him speak like twice in my life, very clear. And he said, oh, no, I'm a good father. And as soon as Alex stepped, my angels took him to heaven, and it was an empty shell of a body that fell. He was not in there. I said, thank you, Lord, for that. And then I got so many people calling me, young people, his friends that I didn't even know because he was off in college. And they said, Mrs. Shewey, Alex saved my life. Because when I was in a deep, dark place, he was a friend to me. And he listened to me and he cried with me and he was there for me. I had like 5 kids tell me that separately, like letters, or it came up to me at a celebration of life. And he went viral. It was just God's doing. And I posted on LinkedIn, Taken Too Soon, and there were over 5 million views of that. And there were 20,000 comments and likes, and it was amazing. And his celebration of life was broadcast, and people from different countries watched this, like 20 some countries and 36 states logged in to watch this. It was crazy. I'm like, why? But we got up on that stage, my husband and my 2 other children and I, and we just talked about the goodness of God. And Alex's testimony of how he nailed the second commandment of loving everybody. He didn't care what you looked like, what you identified as. He was going to love you. He didn't care. He didn't judge. And so on my parents' deathbed, they walked through this life journey with faith. And so when they were both on their deathbed, they received Jesus. And so now I can see that God is using Alex from the other side far more than he would be able to do here on this earth. I know he's in heaven. I wouldn't want him back. If God said you can have him back, that would be so selfish, right? No, you're in heaven. He's good. We will see each other again. And I
Right.
believe very soon we will see each other. And so now I have the mindset where I am honored that God used my son, that he took my son to save so many for the kingdom, bring so many to the kingdom. So it is your mindset, how you decide to walk through this life's journey, because the Bible says, none of us are promised to get through this life without hard times. We're all going to have struggles and trials and tribulations, but it's how do you handle that? How do you choose to deal with them is the key. How do you choose to live your life? And I found doing it with a circle of people and serving others are the key, and leaning into Jesus.
Yes. The first book I read after Barbara died was called Don't Waste Your Sorrows. And I don't remember the author, but the premise of the book was that when you go through grief and suffering and pain, you're going to go through the pain either way, regardless.
Yeah.
Your choice is, can you surrender that pain and God will build strength and resiliency and purpose and value in you by leaning on him as you go through it? Or you can choose to be angry and bitter, in which case you still have all the pain. You just don't get any of the gifts.
That's right. That's right.
And, when you put it in those terms, it's pretty, no-brainer decision. But in the moment, when you're in the midst of that, it's very easy to be overwhelmed and to be resentful and to be bitter. And that's where having community and having support and having people that you can lean on and trust to hold you up when your feet won't hold you up.
And that circles back to, we need to live in community. God's original intention was that we are not isolated, that we don't do life alone. We are to live in community with each other.
Yeah.
We are looking at what does community
Definitely.
look like. It's intergenerational community of, children are important, teenagers are important, the 40-some-year-olds are important, and our seniors are important. And they all have value to each other.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, really, if you think about it, this whole, generation, there's the boomers and there's the, Gen X and there's the millennials. And I mean, that's all kind of arbitrary and constructed because we're all people. We're all individuals. We all have a different perspective on life. All the people that were born in the same year are no more all the same than all the people that were born in the same town are all the same. It's, we're all individuals. And I think that's important to remember as those forces which try to segment society and, pit one group against another in all kinds of different ways, is very destructive at the root of it.
Yes.
So, Stacy, I have really enjoyed this conversation, and I really appreciate you coming on, and that we have been able to share some difficult times that both of us have been through. And I hope and pray that people who watch this will be encouraged, and maybe it'll help somebody going through a difficult time. But back to Hands for Life, how can people who maybe are hearing about it for the first time and it resonates with them and they would like to be a part of your ministry, and how can they get involved, and what can they do to help?
It takes the whole body of Christ. I identify with Nehemiah. I'm like, I'm just the cupbearer. How am I supposed to do this, Lord? So I do need everybody to come alongside for this journey. We have the sponsorship program that you can go to our website and look at all the different people, see who tugs at your heart. You can sponsor a grandparent or grandchild. We are trying to connect with churches to form partnerships with churches where they will become a partner and their congregation could go on mission trips with us to go love on our Hands for Life family members in Africa. We are doing worship nights where our pastor and our team will come to a church and do a worship teaching, preaching night. We do that. If you're local in the Florida, Tampa, Clearwater, St. Pete area, we have clothing drives that we do where we put bins, Hands for Life clothing donation bins in parking lots. and take donations that way. We're looking for corporate sponsors and individual sponsors who can do monthly giving so we can fund our ministry work. There's so many ways. Looking for volunteers, even just to write thank you notes and to, do help us connect our donors to our Hands for Life family in Africa. So there's lots of different ways. We're planning a couple of mission trips for next year right now. So our website the organization is Hands and then a space, the number 4 and life. So for life is all like one word. And the website is the number 4, lworld.org. And we're
all right, and we'll make sure we'll put that in the description below the video. But thank you again for taking the time and for being on Aging in Place as a team sport. The whole point that I think that of the broadcast is that, in order for us to live, we need each other. We need different providers providing different services. We need community. We need family. We need friends. And the more of that we can do, the more rich life we are likely to live and make an impact on others. So thanks again for being here. And I really wish you all the best and hope to be hearing about your successes as time goes on.
Thank you for having me, Chris.
All right. You're welcome.